Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here for this episode of Caregiving Insights for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, because I'm here with Jillian McCleary, also who goes by Jill. I just happen to call her Jillian. And I'm also excited because I have my new background. And so I worked on this and it's just was fun to put together, and I'm glad to have that. So hopefully it's aesthetically pleasing to everybody who's watching. So I'll start by sharing that Jillian's originally from Iowa, now living in Tucson, Arizona. She has siblings in different areas of the country, including Montana, Iowa, and Boston, if I got that correct. And Jillian, on her journey, which led to caring for her mom, she was in the midst of a burgeoning career within the museum industry. And so I want her to talk a little bit about that as well and how that coincided. And also we'll get into, she's a budding entrepreneur at this point. And I can identify with all of that because I was doing my thing, became a caregiver, and then continued my entrepreneurial career, but in a different way, had to restructure it so it fit the life as a caregiver. Jillian, welcome.
Thank you so much, Todd. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. So I'm looking at my notes here, and I may keep looking down here and there just so I make sure I'm following along. So tell me a little bit about how this came to be and how caregiving became a part of your life.
For me, it was sort of a slow and steady part of my life. It didn't suddenly start one day, which I think for some people that is what happens. It starts just suddenly with a stroke or something like that. But for me, it sort of started slowly. My mom was having 2 hip surgeries, doing each side, and she needed assistance. And she asked me if I would, at that time, she lived in Iowa still, and I was in Arizona, and I flew to Iowa to take care of her during both hip surgeries. And that's also when I started to notice that there were some issues going on. She wanted to talk about maybe even moving to Arizona to live with me or to be near me. And I realized that the time was coming where she needed more help and she couldn't live out alone anymore. So we set that up and started cleaning out her house and got her to come to Arizona. And since then, her cognitive abilities really started to decline. It wasn't just the physical health issues, it started to become those cognitive health issues. Originally, she was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which I had never heard of before and sounded really innocent to me. I didn't realize that most people who are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment then go on to have Alzheimer's. The neurologist didn't even say anything. But it did lead to Alzheimer's, and now she's living with me full time, and I'm caring for her 24/7.
I understand what that's like. So can you share a little bit for everybody, the early signs? What were those?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think sometimes we look back and we go, oh my goodness, that was a sign, but we didn't really know it at the time. And when I was moving my mom out of her house, looking back, there was quite a few signs there. She was having obviously some difficulties with making decisions about the items in her home and what to keep and not to keep. She never had been an amazing house cleaner, so it was easy to brush it off, and just sort of think, she just doesn't feel like doing this. But looking back, I think some of the early signs were that she was having trouble keeping up with the house. And then the next big sign was that she was having trouble keeping up with her finances. Something I don't think I've shared with you before, Todd, is that maybe I have, is that somebody came to her door and put her into a horrible financial package that was just not a good annuity and took her money. And, he made her believe that he was helping her, and she bought it. And looking back, she just was not in a place where she could be making those decisions. That was the other big red flag for me. And that was when I took over her finances, which she willingly, I'm very fortunate, she knew there was a problem and she was willing to let me take over for her.
That's thanks for sharing that. That's a really important thing for the audience to know, because we hear about that often you hear it in the news and you read about it, and it's a cautionary tale uh, for older folks. There are tons of predators out there who are trying to take advantage of older folks for that reason. They know their cognitive abilities, whether they have Alzheimer's or not. They prey upon them. And so it's really important to help out your loved ones, your parents, in trying to help them steer away from that. Before I jump further into the caregiving stuff, tell me a little bit about how this coincided with your rise in the museum industry and how that happened.
Yeah. So, it was interesting because this all was happening when I was in my 30s, my mid 30s. My mom was starting to have these health issues, which also coincided, as you were saying, with sort of the rise in my career. I was starting to get more responsibilities, moving into management and supervisory roles at the museum, and then eventually becoming the director of the museum, all while my mom was declining and getting worse. What happened is basically that I was getting more responsibilities at home and more responsibilities at work. And it was almost as if one day I woke up and I was thinking, I'm doing two full-time jobs, more than full-time jobs, by taking care of my mom and doing my job. And it was too much. It was really a lot. And it's also the time when I really started to reach out to get help with my mental health as well, because it's also not easy or clear in that moment that you should just leave your job, or is what the right answer is. I was making good money. I didn't want to lose my income, but I also knew I wanted to take care of my mom as well. And, I think it's really important to talk about mental health, and I really needed help. That was the first time that I actually reached out and got on medication to help with my depression and anxiety. And I don't know how I would have gotten through if I hadn't reached out for help, but I was able to stay doing both for quite some time until it became too much and I couldn't do both anymore.
Thanks for sharing that. That's, I'm sure, helpful for anybody listening. Uh, you had mentioned offline about how the convergence of COVID and technology has enabled the caregiving. Tell us how that played out for you.
Yeah, actually, I would have had to leave my job much earlier if it hadn't been for COVID. It's amazing how the ability to work from home allows you to do the caregiving responsibilities that you have. And it made me believe that I could kind of keep going, right? But being in the museum world, we are a physical museum. You need people to come in. I was working in an art museum, and it came to a point where I needed to go back into the building, and it's tough. There's also a caregiving crisis from people who are working in caregiving fields. It's tough to find people that can come in and do that. So even when I was able to find some help, it was never enough to balance it or to make sure that my mom was getting the care that she needed. And unfortunately, I couldn't continue to work from home. And, even at this point, Todd, even if I could work from home, her needs are too great. I can't work full time anymore, even with that option. But I'm grateful for my employer that allowed me to do that for a while.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. One of the earlier episodes I did was about employer support. And it's a hot topic. Uh, like everything in life, it's on a continuum. So there are some that are not so good and some that are very good and everything in between. So I'm glad to hear that it was working out for you as it did.
Yeah.
So let's talk about documentation, because it's such an important thing that I talk about all the time with people and often on these podcasts. So when you started seeing the signs with your mom and all this started taking place, was there a will in place? Was there a POM in place and so forth? Was anything in place? And how did that process play out?
There was nothing in place. I love my mom, but she had a tough time too. Just to give her some credit, she was a single mom. She had a lot on her plate. How was she supposed to be thinking about all of this kind of stuff? And so I don't blame her at all. But the very first thing we did actually was just she put me on her bank account. We went to the bank, and I got put on her checking account, and that really made things so much easier. I don't know if I understood right away how important it was to get power of attorney, but for me, knowing she was moving to Arizona, we did a power of attorney so that I could find a place for her without her physically coming. And so I could take care of all that for her before she got here. And in hindsight, that was such a blessing that we were forced into that, because it made me comfortable with the power of attorney and knowing what it was and what it included. So when she moved here, she started to fall, and she had 3 major falls, 2 of which ended up in broken bones. And at that point was when we did the full power of attorney and did it again. Because originally it was just really kind of financial, being able to do business things for her. And at that time, her cognitive abilities were declining, but the falls were scary to both of us. Anybody who's had a parent who has fallen, you start to realize quickly just how, I don't want to use the fragile word for her, because she's not fragile. She's a strong woman, but things happen and they're scary. And I think it spooked both of us. And so we're very lucky that because we'd already had experience with the power of attorney, we decided to do it at that time. And it's made things so much easier. It's been incredible what I've needed a power of attorney for her pension. They wouldn't let me change her address without proving power of attorney. It's really important to get those documents for even the most basic of things.
Absolutely. A couple of things regarding falls. So both of my parents have fallen. And I remember when my mom fell, I was not right there. But I remember my dad quickly getting me, and it turned out she had a broken hip, and I had to lift. I didn't know at the time. I was just needed to get her. I basically got her into the car, and we got down there, and within 24 hours, she had a new hip. But you see how it changes how they process moving about. And it changed how I processed wanting them to move about. So it was a challenge for me there, and sometimes they did not meet what they wanted to do. It was sort of this dance. And then I was right in front of my dad when he fell. And he's a big guy. He's almost 6'5", so he had a long way to fall. And that was really frightening, because it was sort of just in slow motion, watching almost like a tree kind of fall.
Oh gosh, yeah, no, falls are scary. And only one of them was I there with my mom as well. And I have to say, slow motion is a great way to describe it. It was like watching it all happen. And the scary part too is that I couldn't get her back up. She did not break anything on that fall, but I had to quickly figure out how to get her back up. I never had any training in that. I'm 110 pounds. I'm teeny. I'm not able to lift her. And I remember the fear that went through me watching her, because she'd already broken her arm and her wrist at that time. And I don't know that anything can ever prepare you for a fall. It's something that it just really, it wakes everybody up, I think.
It does. And when I see their balance now and how it's affected, and I'll see them go like this or something and then catch them. Oh my God, I'm glad there was something there to lean on or so forth.
Yeah. Were you able, I know that you're interviewing me, but that's another conversation, is getting them to use a walker, especially after my mom's hip surgery. She fought it so hard, and I think we all can understand that, because there's something about these associations we have with a walker about what it means for ourselves and our age. And she really fought it. She now embraces it, but it took years before she would embrace a walker. And I think it's almost a physical signifier of sort of that loss of independence for the person. And it's something that is so hard for us when we're watching somebody we love, and we want them to just be as safe as possible, but we also want them to feel independent. We want them to feel like they can make choices. And so it's certainly a tough area for sure.
It is. It's impossible. And like with anything in life, it's impossible for any of the people we know who have not been a caregiver to understand what it's like to be in a caregiver's shoes. It's impossible. You can conceptualize it, but we didn't know until we were really in it. And it's hard, I know, because we have the emotional component to it, the tie to it. It's hard for us to sometimes step back and understand just what you were saying. It's their independence, and it's it's impossible to know what they're dealing with, not only physically, but just from an emotional standpoint, psychological standpoint at this point in their life.
Yeah.
And it's impossible for us to know.
Yeah. We will likely know someday, but you're right. And we can only do our best to meet in the middle of both of our emotions and both of where we're at, and trying to caregive right down that balance, right?
Exactly. Let's talk about each day and what each day is like, because I know we talked offline about this, and I understand your mom's a morning person and that you try to make the most of that time. So can you tell us a little bit about what that morning looks like?
Yeah, yeah. My mom starts each day usually on a really great place. If she's got some great sleep, she wakes up positive and happy and is willing to go with the flow of anything that's happening that day, even if she's confused. She's always been a morning person as long as I can remember. And, I think that's something that's so true with caregiving as well, is you keep a lot of your personality with dementia, even though you might be confused. My mom's still a morning person. So I always try to take advantage of that part of the day for my mental health too, because it's sort of the easy part of the day, right? We try to have a cup of coffee, have a cup of tea, and enjoy the moment. But it also is tough because it is the best time of her day. And you mentioned I'm a budding entrepreneur. And so if I want to get any work done, it's also the best time for me to do that, because it is the time that, not that she's left alone, but she can sort of just do her own thing or do her own activity, and I can get some work done. So I try at least every morning to spend an hour kind of doing my own time, still in the same house as her, still here for her if she needs me. But I do need to take advantage of that great time in the morning for her, because as the day goes on, she does have classical sundowning. And for those that may be not familiar with that, it really signs of increased confusion during the day, especially as you get towards night, which is why it's called sundowning. A lot of it, they believe, is related to sort of loss of energy. Even we know, healthy people without chronic illness right now, for me, I still understand the fatigue at the end of the day and how tired I get and how hard things can be. And it's true for my mom. And so as the day goes on, some of her classic symptoms are that she'll start to want to go home. She is home, but home might be she wants her mom. She'll ask me to call her mom and tell her where she's at. And she doesn't usually have a lot of those behaviors in the morning. And so I am fortunate, though, in the sense that she does have a routine, and it'll change because all caregiving changes and it won't stay this way. But right now, I can anticipate that and try to do things to make sure that, as I know sundowning is coming, try to make it as easy for her as possible to make sure she feels safe. And a lot of that with dementia is she will look to me for how to respond. So that means as the day goes on and my energy depletes, I also have to work to be as positive and happy as I can be, because she's going to look for me. And if I feel positive, if I feel safe, she'll feel positive and safe. And especially when you're caring for a loved one, they can read you like a book. If my mom knows me, it was one of the first things I learned with her dementia, is she can look at me and know that I'm lying. She can look at me and know if I'm tired. And so I have to also make sure I feel those feelings. I have to say, I'm going to put on a smile right now. I'm going to be positive. I have to take a moment of gratitude, because otherwise she'll see right through me. Even, people have this idea that with dementia or Alzheimer's that maybe they can't do that, but a lot of those innate social abilities are still there for the person. And so that's like a lot of what our day looks like. I try to plan an activity every day, one single activity that she can always look forward to. And in fact, we plan out each week on a board. And one thing that my mom does is she looks for the dry erase boards in the house, because those tell her what's going to happen. She's constantly scanning her environment. So today I put down ice cream this afternoon, and she's already brought it up several times that she's looking forward to ice cream. And I just keep that right in front of her, to kind of let her know what to expect that day. It's not always fun. It's not always ice cream. Sometimes it's groceries and errands, but she knows today's an errands day. And so we try to organize our days as best as we can. They'll always go off the rails sometimes, but as much as possible, we try to keep a routine, and that seems to be best for her.
Tell me a little bit about you. You've uh, definitely taken and answered some of the questions I was going to ask, which is great. Uh, so a couple things. One, can you tell me about um, the bedtime routine? You had mentioned a little bit about that and the routine of getting to fall asleep. That would, I'd be interested, and I think people might be interested to hear that.
Yeah, the bedtime routine, it's tough because a lot of it is probably like a parent reading my mom, right? And trying to anticipate her needs. But there's a lot of things that happen at bedtime for her. She gets a lot of anxiety if I leave her side. And so it's really important that I stay with her every step of the way until she's even in bed and closing her eyes. It's really important to her that I'm telling her that she'll see me in the morning, that we'll have coffee in the morning. And what I'm trying to do during all the bedtime routine, because that's the time she's most confused, is trying to speak out loud for her, trying to think for her, anticipating her needs. And so saying, we're going to go to bed now, I'm going to see you in the morning, and trying to just vocalize as much as possible to kind of calm her nerves a little bit, because it is the hardest time of the day for her. And sometimes that means I have to stay in the bed with her for a while until she does fall asleep, but I'm very happy to do that for her.
You had mentioned you bought a wheelchair.
Yeah, that was recent. It took a while for me to buy a wheelchair for exactly what we were talking about before. My mom didn't want one. We all have stigmas and ideas in our heads. And, I think for her, it symbolized such a loss of independence and control for her to get a wheelchair. But we did recently get a wheelchair, and it was the best thing that could ever happen. I'm going to let any caregiver who's listening now know that if you even think a wheelchair might be helpful, get it and you won't regret it. We have gotten to open up our world so much more. It has allowed us to go to museums more often, which from my career that I love to do. Even things like just going to the mall. Of course, with COVID and the flu and everything, we have to be more careful about where we decide to go, but it allows me to take her, and it eliminates a lot of my fears. There's toiletry issues. There's things that now I know I can get her to where she needs to be quickly with the wheelchair. So there's excitement with it because of what we get to see, but it's also a calming tool for me because I can kind of know that I can navigate if we need to get out of a situation because her anxiety is rising. I don't have to worry about her being able to walk there. I can push her and get to where we need to go quickly. So anyone, whether the illness is dementia, Alzheimer's, or something else, if you're considering a wheelchair, definitely get it. My mom, she's had trouble walking for a while, as we mentioned with the falls, and she has bad arthritis, and it has just been a godsend for us.
That's an excellent point about just being able to have her in the wheelchair wherever you are, because if something does happen, you can get out. Because having to rely on, I think about that with my mom, and I take her wherever I go, and most of the time it's just simply to Cleveland Clinic or Cleveland Clinic. So, but that being said, sometimes I think, well, maybe if I just drop her at the door, well, I would go with her, but if we got out at the door and she used the walker, she could go this far. And I think, but maybe not. And she's not used to that. And if she couldn't, we could grab a wheelchair there, but it'd be the whole transition that could be kind of traumatic in trying to move from one to another. Tell me about what your self-care is. And you also mentioned how cameras come into play in giving you some comfort with that.
Yeah. Well, first I'll mention that I do a 15-minute walk every day. That is very important to me. It's part of the morning routine. And the way that I am able to take a walk is with cameras, which is exactly what you're mentioning, Todd. I have come to the conclusion that cameras are great in my house. That's something that I think is very controversial, right? Again, going back to the person's dignity and all of that. But I now have cameras and motion detectors all through the house. So I know when doors are opened, I can see my mom when she's watching television. And what that's allowed me to do is to go on a 15-minute walk every day and get outside in the morning and to breathe fresh air. I don't listen to anything. I just allow myself just to go outside and just be outside. And I really believe that we all need to figure out what that self-care is for ourselves, because it is what fuels me then to get through the rest of the day with the sundowning and those kinds of things. So yes, I'm so grateful for cameras. If you're on the fence about it, there's a lot that you can do with just motion detectors too. But that's probably the most important thing that I do for self-care every day, other than, of course, seeking help when I need help with mental health beyond that. But just that exercise is good. Everything's great about a walk. Being outdoors, it all shows up as far as your abilities to then be a great caregiver when you get back.
Absolutely. That's a topic that could be a whole podcast episode, which I've done a bit about, and I've got one coming up, which will be definitely focused on that. We can talk about that for hours.
Yes.
So let's talk about vacation. And I know we had talked about that offline, but the things I'm interested in talking about and having your perspective for the viewers are 4 things: preparation, contingency planning, why it's worthwhile, and how it feels strange.
Oh gosh, I almost want to start with why it feels strange. It's
Fun.
but I do want to say, yeah, vacations are important. I don't get to take a lot of them, but I do get to take them. You mentioned in the introduction that I have siblings that live across the country, and I'm very fortunate that recently, after I got married, my sisters came in and allowed me to take an amazing vacation to Egypt, which I'm not sure I thought would have been possible with caregiving, but it is, but it's not easy. The preparation for a trip like that, I feel like you need just as much preparation as the time you're going to be gone, because you need to be able to leave detailed instructions. You need to be able to make sure that everything's going to be in the place, that the person caregiving for your loved one is going to be comfortable. I don't think I understood too just how much somebody has to enter your world to care for your loved one. And that means all parts of your home and food preparation. It's having the emergency numbers. It's an incredible amount of work in order to be able to leave. And it is worth it though. Once I was away, there were moments I was able to just let go and relax and rejuvenate. But there were also times I felt guilty about that. As much as this may or may not be true, you always believe nobody can do it better than you. And there's guilt and there's concern, that maybe you forgot to let somebody know something. Oh, when they act this way, maybe you should try this. And it's hard to let that go. But as much as possible, I hope I hit on all 4 of them. I'm not sure if I did, but as much as possible, if you can do it, I encourage everyone to get away, to find whatever they need to do, whether that's hiring help, and just start planning as early as you can and to try to get everything in order. I know it's not easy, but it is worth it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. I can speak to my experience. And this was pre-COVID. So in November of 2019, after 2.5 really tough years caregiving, or no, it was 1.5 years. It felt like 2.5. I was able to plan a trip to Europe, and I got away. And the preparation was included with the contingency planning. So it was putting together a team of people that I trusted locally, that at that point in time, we were friends. They were healthcare professionals that I had met along my mom's journey for that first 1.5 years. And the 3, 4 of them just without hesitation stepped up. And since then, we've become really good friends. It's just that you learn that people want to help. For the most part, they want to help. And so I had an emergency contact who is a nurse by training, and just she was terrific and there for both of my parents if they needed anything, and a few others that were calling on a schedule every other day so that they could check in just to say hi, hey, anything you need. And as you mentioned, just giving them all the information, the list of doctors and pretty much an outline of their whole situation of their health. And so it can be done. It takes work and it takes time, but the outcome of that, knock on wood, barring anything that comes up, is wonderful. To get to go away and you get to feel like you have somewhat of a life.
Exactly. Yeah, somewhat of a life. I think that's a good way to put it. And I love that you mentioned the local help. I think that's something where, I got a little paranoid because maybe I didn't have local contacts that did have the medical background. But I realized, one of my good friends works for the sheriff's office and he's happy to be on call if needed, and he knows all the connections. And there's people. I have a friend who has a therapy dog and is happy to just come over if there's moments of anxiety. And so to think sort of outside the box and not necessarily feel, it's best if they do have that medical background, but to know that there's other backgrounds and other experiences that can still be part of your care team, and to be open to thinking about that.
That's a great point, and I'm really glad you shared that. It's true. I've been fortunate that I had those people in the healthcare background, but to your point, there are people in other disciplines, so to speak, other backgrounds that can help in different ways. And so I guess the moral of the story is don't discount anybody, because people can help and you'd be surprised. So we're winding down here and there's just a few things left. And so here's a big question for you. And I know we could spend, again, a whole other segment on this, but if you can just bring it down to a minute or two, what are the lessons you've learned through this all?
Yeah, right.
It's not fair, I know.
Oh, that is big. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the decision to leave my career, because that's one of the most biggest decisions I've made recently. And so I think the lesson I've gotten from that, there's not been a single day where I've regretted it since I've left. And I think the lesson is to really look at your values, to really ask yourself what's important to you, and to jump if that's what you need to do, to make sure you just jump towards your core values and jump towards love. You're never going to regret that. I could have decided to stay with money or career and go that way, but we all need to step back and live our lives in a way that we're going to say, what would I never regret? And to try to live that way and try to encompass it. And if you can do that, it's going to make all your decisions a little easier, even when they're hard. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've had is to follow my heart.
That's beautiful. And I think that's a wonderful thing to share with everybody, and it'll resonate for a lot of folks and have a lot of folks thinking. I appreciate you sharing your story, your mom's story, and I know it'll be helpful to folks who are watching, no doubt. I was thrilled to have you in my new room here, and Caregiving Insights, and I'll look forward to being in touch and hearing how everything's going.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you for what you're doing. And these are so valuable for everyone, so thank you.
My pleasure. primary purpose of the podcast is to educate. While guests are invited to listen, listeners acknowledge that they are not being provided professional advice from the podcast or any guests. One Day, One Week and its sponsor, 17 Commerce LLC, expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, reliance on, or inability to use the podcast episodes or the information presented in the episodes.